Alalasundaram, Deputy Assistant Commissioner and Deputy CIO at CBP, Captain Christopher Clark, AI Lead for the U.S. Marine Corps, Brandon Bean, AI and ML Solutions Senior Director for the Defense Division at GDIT, and Chris C.T. Thomas, Technical Director in the Global Office of the CTO at Dell Technologies. Let's give them a warm welcome. Yeah, we'll do it live. So let me get where I need to be. All right, thanks guys for joining me. I'm really excited for this panel. As we've talked a lot about today, connectivity at the edge is so important. So I think we're going to dig in quite a bit. Again, welcome. And Jay, we'll start with you, and I think go down the line. I'd love to hear, as we think about next generation advanced network capabilities themselves, there's things like 6G and next G as people are referring to it. There's also new forms of connectivity as we've seen Starlink and other forms of communications capabilities like that come about. What are those things that you think are driving that next generation concept for networking?
No, thank you. Thanks for having me. And I'm going to keep with the theme here at the edge, right? Because CBP operates in a very diverse environment, right? We have over 328 ports of entries across the country. Some of them are highly urbanized areas and some of them not, right? And the same with the Border Patrol stations. There are over 140 plus Border Patrol stations across the country. And it's very important to get these next generation network capabilities in these environments in the hands of the officers and agents that do their job day in and day out to protect our national security and facilitate legitimate trade and travel. So CBP, we've invested heavily in technologies like 4G, 5G, something that's reliable, resilient, to be able to get that connectivity in place for these diverse, disparate environments to make sure that the officers have the ability to do their jobs. And you mentioned Starlink, right? And low Earth orbit satellite solutions like OneWeb and Starlink becomes extremely critical for us to keep our operations running in areas where there's like very little connection or no connection. And that's the only way we're going to be able to do this mission. And the technology in the space is constantly evolving, as you said. 6G, while it's experimental, it's promising to be a lot more fast, right? Offer us a lot more speed and less latency. And that's going to be a game changer for us. And not only that, and they're already talking about quantum networking and AI-driven networking. So all of these things should be a game changer and extremely exciting as an IT guy.
And they all rely on the network, so it's absolutely fascinating. Captain Clark, obviously the Marines are known for being those first to deploy, the forward deployed in very austere environments, as we've talked about throughout the day. Whether it's AI or not, how important is the network to those operations in today's world?
Oh, absolutely critical. And from my perspective, I'm a commo by trade, communications officer, so dealt significantly with networking and connectivity. Currently in my role, I'm the AI lead, so focused on AI policy and strategy, so I'll try to stay in that lane for the most part. But with machine learning models, the speed of inference is critical, and having the network that can support that and support getting the data to those models is essential. So when we look at, in some cases we'll have machine learning models at the enterprise where they can, have access to all of the cloud compute resources that we want. But on the edge, we need to weigh, the difference between taking all of that with us and potentially being a target, having a large heat signature and a lot of equipment to carry around, with, the potential benefits of those machine learning models for prediction, whether, we're still looking at where and how we could integrate large language models into edge operations. That's, very much still a topic of experimentation, but we can imagine that being the case, and we need to be able to get that inference to the edge, in many cases, at a millisecond inference. So we need to be able to get the data to the models, we need to be able to train those models, and we need them to inference very rapidly as well in order to make those decisions. So that's kind of, some of the things that we're looking at, and it's going to be critical. So if you imagine a self-driving autonomous vehicle, and you're looking at driving down a road and there's a pedestrian, you need that vehicle to, one, accurately stop when it needs to stop, and two, make that decision within milliseconds. And there are many other use cases where that same kind of logic applies, and having that networking infrastructure that can really move the data and provide that information across disparate units, potentially on island chains and various different locations is critical. And satellite connectivity is also going to be an essential piece of that, as well as the local area network and the ability to move rapidly.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. Brandon, I would imagine you have similar thoughts having AI ML background and focus on that, but tell me about those next generation connectivity solutions that you're thinking about that can help fuel that next generation of emerging technology.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't think Chris could have set it up any better for me. So the things that keep me up at night are, millisecond inference, right? How do we facilitate that at the edge? So for me, it's more about layer 3 and what we can do when we're inside the pipe. So we talk a lot about 6G, 5G, Wi-Fi 6, and these other technologies that we can bring to the first mile, right? But what do we do inside the pipe beyond that? So for me, it's about not just how do we get inference at the core to the edge, it's also how do we enable that at the edge, and then how do we enable that from edge to edge? So for me, it's looking at things like secure vector routing, software-defined networking, automating the PACE plan, one, to make it easier for the warfighter, but two, so that we can leverage those capabilities to really distribute cloud resources. So, we've worked with a lot of the vendors on true distributed cloud. So, how do we find those hundreds of points of presence, no matter where you're at in the world, to get you into that secure backbone faster and get you dedicated bandwidth in the backbone, and then leverage those capabilities to federate. And that's probably my biggest problem right now is how do I truly federate machine learning, both machine learning ops, but also model serving and that live inference and that streaming data. So for me, that's the really big thing. I want to focus more inside the pipe and what I can do inside the pipe to be able to enable that at the edge.
CT, I'd love to hear your take on it because we've talked a lot about mission today, but how are those next generation connectivity solutions kind of tying back to the mission? How are they driving more mission effectiveness?
So, I think what we've discussed is how do I get to that outcome, right? How do I get to the actual outcome? What technologies? I need flexibility no matter where I'm at in the world. So you start looking at your terahertz spectrum, you start looking at LEO, you start looking at how do I bond these things together? You start looking at even ad hoc networks, right, to be able to support the ABMS type mission. So I think collectively being able to surmise multiple technologies at the same time and then introduce a common management and control plane, such as a radio intelligent controller, right? Now that's becoming more prevalent. It's not something that's just conceptual. We have these now that are GA for testing and experimentation across the world.
That's very interesting because there's so many that you're dealing with and trying to navigate amongst them. It's definitely an important point. I'd love to hear some use cases, particularly from our folks on the government side of, and from industry as well, but what are some of those use cases or examples where this is proving to be impactful, particularly to mission? Maybe Jay, we can come back to you.
Yeah, sure. Ben said it best when he kicked off the event, when your first kickoff panel, right? Data is king. Having that information available at the edge in the hands of the officers and agents is a game changer, right? Because then they can focus on doing their job and getting those capabilities in. Especially in CBP's mission space, we look at having the officers and agents be able to do facial biometrics, facial verification, touchless fingerprint processing. And the use cases are endless, right? So we're able to, the key is going to be able to support these vast amounts of IoTs at the edge, at the operating environment, whether it's a border patrol station or a port of entry, or in between those ports of entries and border patrol stations, right? The space is disparate, bringing those solutions together, having these specific use cases, gives the officers the tools that they need to be able to leverage and identify threats. A few years ago, there was a lot of fentanyl coming into our country. The officers are able to counter that by leveraging technology like non-intrusive inspection. I dragged one of my executive directors, Bible of Dakota, here today because a lot of the work is being done in this space, right? And that's what they do. And Chris mentioned, not Chris, I'm sorry. One of you mentioned about what keeps you up at night. That's what keeps us up at night.
Yeah.
Being able to give the tools that our officers and agents need in their hands, in their environment, they're able to do their job the best way they can. And they're trained to detect these threats and catch these bad people and bad things from coming into our country. How, as technologies, can we provide them the solutions that they need to be able to do their job?
Yeah, that makes sense. Captain Clark, I would imagine there's a handful or more of examples that you could share, but maybe one or two that are most, prescient and important to you.
Sure. And before I share the use cases, one thing that we're doing, and it was mentioned earlier today, somewhere between 80 and 90% of AI use cases are not realized. I haven't verified that metric, but we'll assume it for now. There certainly are a lot of use cases that have just not been realized. And one of the things that we're doing, and we've already started, the Marine Corps, we published our AI implementation plan in April, very recently. And as one of the main arms of that is standing up digital transformation teams across the service. So we stood up the first one at 2MEF, our second Marine Expeditionary Force in Camp Lejeune in April, right along the same time of that document getting signed. And the second team is being stood up at Marine Corps Logistics Command next week, actually. And we're standing up more of these. And their main purpose, there are several, but one of them is to identify these use cases. They are closest to the problem. And we know there are many use cases that are out there that we just don't know about. And so they are identifying those. 2MEF recently did a use case ideation session. One of the things that they drew out of it was predictive maintenance, which is something that I think there's a lot of interest in. There's been a lot of work in as well, and having the right sensors on the right vehicles, collecting the right data, preparing that data, and then building the right models to be able to predict maintenance before it's needed so that we can then build that into predictive logistics, which isn't really necessarily an edge use case, but it feeds the edge because we can then predict what equipment needs to be where, when it needs to be there, before it needs to be there. Maybe not perfectly, but we can look at use cases across industry where they're doing this right now. And it's not perfect, but it's saving millions of dollars, and in the Marine Corps, potentially saving millions of lives and impacting our ability to fight. So that's kind of where we're at right now, and I think we're not quite, we're still looking into where exactly to go with some of those things, but I think that's kind of the direction we're looking for, at least our first digital transformation team.
That's great. Brandon, from industry perspective, obviously, as Captain Clark mentioned, there's plenty on the industry side that could be applicable. Are there those, or are there any on the actual agency side that you've seen in operation that you would share that are really cutting edge or important or really showcase the power of a next generation connectivity solution?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say timely, right, would be counter UAS and air defense.
Oh.
So, long before we saw the tops popping off of shipping containers and 80% of Russia's bomber fleet being, sunken into oblivion.
Yeah.
We're already seeing the writing on the wall with needing to be able to serve mesh capabilities at the edge to drive counter UAS and air defense. And so, right now that's one of the big things for us, and at least for my team is, how do we bring that to bear for the customer in an efficient manner, but also drive all of the synergies that we've heard up, here on stage so far, all the way from digital transformation and understanding and adaptation, all the way through being able to push that inference out, see it on a screen, and make an informed decision faster at the edge.
Same question to you, CT. Are there industry examples that would be applicable to the government space, or are there actual government operational examples that you see as those that are best indicators of what next generation connectivity solutions really empowers?
So, I think we can look at current events as one example, right? The government has been very, very active as far as adopting LEO at scale. But as we start to look at some of the experimentation that we're doing and I guess more sensitive projects, right, we've been able to successfully create dynamic communities of interest, right? One of the common threads based off the topics we've discussed today is as you look at AI, as you look at edge, and as you look at 5G, 6G, right, these are all data-centric, right, architectures and solution sets. So the overlap between the capability is making the actual network data aware, having the actual policy and security controls actually dynamic enough to support the mission set, and having them application aware, and being able to do this in a fluid and dynamic fashion, right? Whether or not I'm doing this in an MPE environment, whether or not I'm doing this for law enforcement, that piece is irrelevant, right? We're experimenting with this even in agriculture today. The number of different sensors that are doing for smart ag, we're taking that and then taking that to the battlefield, right? Proving this out, right, theoretically, and then moving and lifting and shifting that over. So I think we'll start to see this become more integrated into our existing programs of record and even new programs as we move forward.
That's great. So I think we have about 4 minutes left, so it's enough time for each of you to kind of give a brief response to this next one. But I think this area is sort of riddled with challenges too. It's really hard because there's a lot of constraints on the network, and that leads to innovation and things like Starlink that we've seen. So I'm going to actually come back to you, CT, and come this way this time. But challenges that you see and how we're sort of taking them head on to sort of overcome them and breed out the next generation solutions.
I think the biggest piece is getting started early, right? A lot of people are waiting on the fence to get started with their AI experimentation to figure out what they want to do and what direction they want to go. The integration challenge, as we talk about IoT, IT, data center, cloud, getting that all to mesh together from a security and policy perspective, bringing in the communications, typically those have all been separate teams. Mm-hmm. Now you have to look at that as the enterprise architecture. The other piece, right, our acquisition policies, they lag, right? We've tried to purchase and procure each one of those technology independently. Well, if the left hand is not talking to the right, you're going to have integration challenges and risks that you're going to introduce just due to that.
Brandon?
Yeah, so I think, obviously denied, degraded, intermittent, and latent is a big issue. There's only so much spectrum to be had, right? There are scientific limitations to being able to do anything else. And we, as well as our allies and adversaries, are all operating in the same spectrum. So I think being efficient and optimizing the best we can, but I'll take it back to a foundational aspect that we don't really talk about a lot when we talk about next-gen networking is pushing bad data across those very limited pipes that we have, right? So we have to go all the way back to foundational data management. And when we're building out those streaming pipelines and capabilities, we really have to work on making sure we have good data to push so we're not wasting the resources that we're trying so hard to keep.
Yeah, data has really been a sort of undercurrent for our conversations today, and it makes total sense. Captain Clark.
Yeah, I hate to be cliche, but yeah, it's the data. We've got data in various systems, and it can be challenging to get access to it. We have legacy systems that don't have service interfaces, and if they do, they're not standardized. And so those are things that we're working to modernize and address, but a huge challenge. And then another piece, from my perspective, is the infrastructure, which is a lot of what this is about. Specifically on the AI ML, the ML ops piece of that, we have those capabilities, but they're very, in very niche pockets. But like was said, there are different organizations that are working different efforts, and we need to collectively bring those together to a unified environment and infrastructure platform that supports ML ops. And so, we have IT ops and the IT infrastructure, and then ML ops is often just a small piece of it, but it needs to be able to support streaming data, batch data. We need to be able to do monitoring, continual monitoring of the models and continual learning. And those are things that we need to be able to do across various different environments and ecosystems.
Jay, you've got the final word.
I look at the sentiments of my fellow panelists. I mean, they said that they covered each aspect of it. Cybersecurity is going to be a big concern. Having the data at the edge, privacy is a big concern, policy changes. And there's only so much bandwidth to be had, right? And I remember going out to a port once, and I saw storage areas, massive amounts of data being stored locally at these ports of entries. When I inquired about their cybersecurity posture, they said, "Oh, I have the key to that room." That was a cybersecurity posture. And the data retention policy was one said a week, and another person said it's 2 weeks, and another person said, "Oh, we keep adding more service to it." So those are some of the challenges that exist in those environments, and we need to work together to figure out how to get the data to our cloud environment, into our network, for information security, as well as being able to take the data and then manage the data properly.
All right. Well, thank you all, gentlemen, for tying this important topic together. Once again, Jay, Captain Clark, Brandon, CT, let's give them a warm round of applause for joining me on stage.